Hello and welcome to this video on how to revise for A-level classics. Hi, my name's Hannah and I've just finished my A-level in classics or classical civilizations, and I've got kind of loads of tips and tricks that I picked up along the roller coaster of A-levels on how to best manage your A-level classics experience, how to do best, what to do, what not to do. So hopefully these tips will be really useful, and if they are, please comment, I'd really appreciate it. And if you've got any other questions, I'll do my best to answer them. So in terms of entering the subject, so I'd never done classics before. I came with no real expectations, no real idea of what classics actually was. I thought it was just ancient history, but it's actually more like a study of ancient society, including the literature, the politics, the history, the sociology, and everything in between. So that's one of the first things that really was a bit of a shock to me when we started studying literature, and I thought we were just going to be studying history. So it's really important that you get an understanding of what classics as a subject actually entails. You're probably much more informed than me, but I'm sure there's some other people like me who went into the subject a bit confused, or that they were just recommended to go into it from their general humanities interest. So I definitely recommend just having a bit of an introduction into the classics world, like go to a ancient history museum and just get a grasp of what society was like then, and it will 100% help you adapt to the vastly different way of life back then and make the whole experience a bit less daunting, because I really found it a bit daunting coming to terms with all their different religions and their different cultural values. So yeah, I definitely recommend a sort of introduction into classics, whether that's on YouTube, museums, the internet, books, any way you can really get your hands on classics material before term starts, and your teachers might have even given you some recommended reading. The first thing that's really important to know about classics is the reading. Essentially, for the OCR spec, you will have to read 2 Homeric texts, and I'm telling you now, these texts are chunky. Let's go to focus. We read the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, but I don't have that with me right now. And essentially they're big, long Homeric texts that are kind of not dense in their language, but they take a long time to read and understand. There's lots of characters, and they're amazing, amazing books once you can wrap your head around them. But that's one thing to be aware of. So if you didn't really enjoy a lot of reading during English Lit GCSE, then I'm not sure whether Classics A-level, in the specification I did anyway, would be the best A-level for you. To maybe look into something that you still have that humanities base but less of the literature, because the literature is quite a key component of the OCR spec. So it's really important to bear in mind the sort of source material you'll be encountering and the amount of reading you'll have to do, not only of the source material itself, but the wider reading to gain scholarship and quotes that you can use in your essays. So the first tip I would give you is, when reading through your source material, I'd go for different strategies for each source material. So if you're doing my OCR spec, I did components 33, 11, I think everyone needs to do 11. The plays, you're going to want to read in full before you do any sort of analysis or anything like that, just to wrap your head around the structure, as it's quite different from any modern plays you might have done in English literature or anything like that. You have to get your head around the dramatic method of the time, and it's really useful to just read it in full with no expectations and no other sort of ideas in your head. So maybe that would be a good thing to do in a half term or a holiday or a weekend, Also look out for, both in the plays and in the Homeric books, key points of character development, or like a character arc. So you'll quite quickly establish, say in the Odyssey, the main characters are Odysseus, his wife Penelope, his son Telemachus. So you can sort of map their journey as characters. So maybe you could do some colour coding in your book summary and say which parts of the book apply to which character, or was this a particularly important point for one of the characters. And I think that's really helpful in grasping character development, and you can use that in your essays in your exam. Here I've got the collected works of Cicero, and what I essentially did was read all of them in full. So it was a legal speech and some letters, and then what I sort of did was create flashcards with the key points of the letter and any key quotes, and I just sort of kept them in the book to remind myself of the content of the letter, because in sort of dense language that Cicero uses, it's not always clear what the subject matter is straight away. So I could look at that letter and be like, okay, what year is it? 46 BC, what's going on? Who are the important figures at the time, and what is the type of letter? So those sort of details will be so useful to having quick reference in the exam. Right, another sort of organisational tip, particularly for A2 year, that I could not recommend more, and it helped me so much, was writing essay lists. So lists of every different type of essay that you'll come across in the exam, because particularly for the OCR spec there are lots of different types of essays, and some of them are quite similar. So it's really important that you know what types of 10 markers, 20 markers and 30 markers you're going to come across, so that you can practice them using, I know there's only limited amounts of past papers, but you can find, I believe the AQA and the old OCR past papers or past exam papers that they've used are fairly similar to the subject content that is currently being used for the new spec, which is sort of a merger of the two. So I'd really recommend finding out exactly what essays there are in all three exams, writing a list of all of them, and then every time you write an essay of a particular type, tick that off, and it will, I promise you, help so much to like think about, okay, I haven't done a 20 marker on theatre in ages, and the exam's in what, like 3 months, so I'd better do one of those before the exam, so I'm confident in my structuring and my subject content. So yeah, that's really useful. Another thing about the essay lists is that there are two marking criteria, assessment objectives, AO1 and AO2 in OCR Classics, and that's really important because they target different areas, and once you familiarise yourself with those two assessment objectives, you can work out the weightings of AO1 and AO2 on every essay. So AO1, I believe, is the understanding of the subject matter, and AO2 is more like the analysis and the valuation. So once you really have a grasp of how much AO1 and AO2 you need to put in an essay, that makes essay planning so much easier, because you know exactly how much evidence and how much analysis and how much understanding you need to show in order to get full marks, or as close to full marks as you're capable of. In general, planning essays, writing essays is great for the initial phase of your A-level. This is pretty much true of all A-levels. Once you know you can write a good essay, I'd say it's more important to be able to make quick plans and be confident on structuring an essay around a subject matter in a short amount of time than actually fully writing an entire essay out. I wrote so many essay plans in the run-up to my exams, and at that point you don't always have the energy to write a whole essay, and it's probably not going to be the best essay you've ever written, so it makes more sense to plan essays towards the end, although obviously you want to be writing as many full-length practice essays as you can and getting them marked by your teacher in order to really like hone your style, because that's actually quite a particular style that they're looking for in classics essays, which is different from other humanities. Folders. So I really struggled with my folder organisation. I don't think it was entirely my fault, it was just the way the course was structured at my school. That meant we sort of dipped in and out of different components and it was quite disorganised, so I struggled to understand which pieces of work fitted with which component and things like that. What I ended up doing is creating a folder for each exam. So I believe this is my theatre folder. I've got little dividers in there. I don't know whether you can see for each play. It's quite messy because we got lots of handouts, lots of reading, and you can expect to be given a lot of reading by your teachers. So I would just really recommend filing in classics more than really any other subject. It's just essential to be able to find those scholarly articles and mind maps and resources you've made for yourself, particularly if you split it per exam. So I went through this folder maybe a month before my exam, and I could pick out those key resources which would really help with my revision, and also see where I was falling short in terms of each play for that topic. So folder organisation is an absolute must for classics. Right, the sort of last tip I think I've got for today, question themes. So obviously with the 30 mark and 20 mark questions, they're going to be sort of theme related questions, and what I found super useful was going through the book and looking for the key themes that examiners might be interested to ask me about. So for example, for let's just use the Odyssey because it's here. Key themes that were sort of dwelt on in both the textbook and the AQA and OCR past papers, as well as the specimen papers we got given, were Xenia, which is the guest and host relationship in ancient Greek culture, women, and maybe like the concept of being a hero. So if you create mind maps surrounded by those themes and then bring in the evidence you've gathered and the scholarship you've looked at, you will be so much better prepared if that theme comes up in the exam. I'll just do a quick segment on things I wish I'd known before I started classics. I've already mentioned sort of a general like naivety or lack of knowledge about the subject as a whole. So that'd be great if I had actually looked into it a bit more before I started, but I'm so glad I did it because it was my favourite A-level. I learnt so much and it really introduced me to politics and philosophy, which I want to study at university, so it was such an eye-opener in terms of like what there is to be learned academically, what resources are out there, and that like history of civilization, at least Western civilization, and how it's sort of involved and filtered through most European countries and the world really. Right, that brings me on to scholarship. This is quite a classics exclusive skill that you probably won't have to come across in most other A-levels, apart from maybe some English literature specifications. But oh my god, it's so important that you are aware of it and that you use it in your essays from as early on as possible and integrate it into your essay writing, and that is scholarship. So in the textbooks, I'll try and find one now, you'll have these little blue boxes that say modern scholarship, and you can use these modern scholars like Mary Beard, Edith Hall to back up your points in your essays, and that will allow them to fulfill the full threshold this is only applying really to the 30-mark essays, although you can use scholarship everywhere in your exams, but you really need it for the long essays. So I got really daunted by the scholarship thing, but you really don't need to go out of your way and do a ton of wider reading for it. Firstly, those textbooks are full of modern scholarship which you can use, put on flashcards, learn off by heart, and you will not get penalised for using the modern scholarship that has been approved by the exam board and put into their textbook. So 100% use the scholarship in the textbook. Another easier way of finding scholarship is the In Our Time podcasts, which are available on BBC Sounds. Now, some of the classicist lecturers they have on there for the unis can be quite pretentious or like use very flouncy language, but I'd really recommend Angie Hobbs and Edith Hall. They often use quotes that are relatable to the modern day, which the examiners love. So if you can compare something from the ancient times to modern times, you will get credited for that, and it's an interesting and original point. So for example, Edith Hall says that soap opera of the modern day is a lot like Greek tragedy. So if you use interesting and perceptive points like that, the examiners will reward you for it. That's what the examiners are really looking for, and if you can hack scholarship, it will 100% improve your grades and improve your mark earnings threshold. I also have so many YouTube recommendations. I'll link them all down below, but the three that probably stand out most to me are for Homer and some of the plays and the general Greek and Roman mythology. Overly Sarcastic Productions, I believe they're an American YouTube channel, and it's run by Red and Blue, and oh my god, and Blue also does amazing Roman history videos, so definitely check them out because they're really encouraging and inspiring content about classics which are adapted for a young audience or a student audience, so I couldn't recommend them more. Also for Roman politics in particular, Historia Civilis, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, has some great sort of infographic videos about the senatorial system, the political system, the battles if you're interested in that, so I'd definitely check them out as well. Again, I'll link them. Furthermore, this kind of surprised me, but John and Hank Green's Crash Course YouTube channel also has a Crash Course Theatre section and a Crash Course Literature section, as well as their history section, so combined they actually cover a great deal of the classics course, including the Roman Republic, the plays. I think Oedipus is featured in the literature section, and in the theatre channel, or like part of Crash Course, they do the origins of theatre and the sort of progression to Greek tragedy and the form and Aristotle. What I would mention is it's somewhat simplified on Crash Course. I think Overly Sarcastic Productions and Historia Civilis go a bit further in their explanation and their key terminology. However, for a baseline conceptual understanding of classics, I couldn't recommend Crash Course resources more. I'd really recommend them. What I'd wish I'd known is kind of, it wasn't a bad thing, but it was just quite interesting and I didn't realise it'd be part of the course, is the visual source analysis. So for the play component, component of the classics course, we had to look at vases and theatres as archaeological sources to give evidence about the plays themselves, the ways they were performed and so on, and I just didn't realise that was part of the course. So it's really interesting to be able to learn about the different techniques of making the vases, the kind of materials they used, but I just wish I'd known that that was part of the course before I started, because it would have given me a better sort of idea of the breadth that classics or classical civilizations as a course covers. Yeah, another thing that I wish I had known or wish I'd done are glossaries. Glossaries for pretty much everything in classics. Characters are so confusing. There are so many characters with similar names in the Homeric epics and in Virgil, so I'd really recommend doing a main character glossary. I believe there's one in the textbook, but if you make your own, it will sort of stick in better. Make flashcards or something about each character to remember who they are and test your classmates. I'd also recommend glossaries about key concepts in theatre or Athenian culture, whatever component you're doing, and then again historical figures and maybe key events in Roman times. Also for the A2 Roman Republic component, timelines were so helpful, particularly if you're researching several characters at once and their different lifespans, where they sort of intermingle, where they cooperate, where they fight, etc. So those are two things I'd really recommend, and I'd wish I'd understood the usefulness of those resources at the start of the course so that I could have compiled them throughout and ended up with a really useful resource that I could flick through before my exams to check my knowledge. Another thing that can be quite daunting, it sounds really trivial, but is the dating system of BC. So obviously the higher the number in BC, the older the date, so it actually can be quite a struggle, even though it's quite common sense for people adapting to that time system and putting events and dates and things in order in correspondence to the BC system. So that's something that you might find takes a while to wrap your head around, or you might be already familiar with it. Just one more thing I would add that I didn't expect was how expensive it would be to do a classics A-level. I mean, for other A-levels you do need to buy books, but for classics A-level, if you saw like at the opening of this video, you need to buy a lot of books, and that wasn't even all the books I had to buy. I can't give you an exact number, but I'm pretty sure each of the textbooks is around the £20 mark, so that alone is £60 for all the textbooks. What I would really recommend, if you feel like that might be a difficulty for you, don't let it put you off the subject. Just really look into if your school offers any book subsidy programs, because it will honestly really be worth it for you in your classics A-level if you have the right books and are able to sort of treat them as your own. I mean, I've ripped my Odyssey copy pretty much to shreds because I looked at it so much, so they're so useful to have. So if expense is a worry for you, I would make sure your school or college that you're applying to can help you out with the book fees, or if you have a really good library that can supply you with enough copies of the books that they won't run out. I think that's worth putting into consideration before you start your classics course, which I didn't realise before I started. Okay, I've really rambled on in this video, but I hope you can find something useful, and I really hope you decide to take classics A-level. It is a tough A-level. It's probably the closest A-level to university study, but that will be reflected in your CV, and I assure you it will be an amazing and really enlightening experience. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and leave a comment. If you've got any questions about the course, I'm more than happy to explain more in detail how to answer essay questions or how to revise particular components. And yeah, have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next video.